Hi everyone! Today we are making the mini bag. The mini bag is a small bag with minimal hardware and optional quilting. It is a great size for when you only need to carry the essentials, and it is also a great size for children. The bag can be carried by hand using the top handle or worn as a crossbody or over the shoulder using the adjustable strap. Inside the main compartment is a zipper pocket with no visible zipper tape edges, and a mesh pocket for smaller items. The assembly of this bag ensures no saggy lining because binding is used. An optional sturdy bottom to prevent the bottom of the bag from sagging as well is also included in the pattern, which you can get at sewnideas.com. I hope you liked the video and enjoy making your own mini bag. Let's get started. Start by printing out the pattern pieces at 100%. On pattern piece number 1 is a 1 inch and a 4 centimeter test square. Measure the test squares, making sure they are the correct size. This will ensure the rest of your pattern is printed to scale. You also need to print out page number 5, which is the cutting list. At the top of the page, it has the meaning of all the abbreviations. On this page, you can easily see what it is you are going to cut, which pattern pieces, the measurements, and in what fabric it is going to be cut out in. The measurements are removed for this video, but will be on your pattern. Cut out each of the long boxes at the scissor markings. Now you can use the boxes as cutting labels that can be attached to the fabrics as you cut them. However, before you start cutting out fabric, you need to either know or test your machine to see how your machine handles thick layers. If your machine doesn't like to sew through thick layers, then cut the flex foam using pattern piece number 1A. Please note on the pattern pieces there is an arrow with the word grain. The arrow needs to be placed parallel to the grain of your lining fabric. This is the grain of your fabric, this is the width, and this is the height. If your machine can handle thick layers, then you can cut the main body pieces in faux leather and flex foam a little bigger than pattern pieces number 1, and then after quilting, you can draw around using pattern piece number 1. But before cutting it out, sew around it and then cut it out. If your machine doesn't like to sew through thick layers, then cut the flex foam using pattern piece number 1A like I've done here. I used some small strips of painter's tape to help hold the flex foam in place. On the wrong side of the wide top zipper panel, draw a line that is 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters up from one of the long edges. Now place the decoville along the drawn line and iron in place. Then place the flex foam on top of the decoville, and now place the last piece of fusible interfacing on top and iron in place, especially around the edges to hold the flex foam secure. Here's what it will look like once it has been ironed. To iron the rest of the decoville and flex foam in place, use the instructions on page 6 in the pattern. When all fabrics have been cut out, interfacings have been attached, and markings made, here is what you should have. Main body pieces. 2 in faux leather and 2 in lining fabric. I am going to show you where on the bag the different pieces are going to be. This is the bag I made in the pattern. As you can see, I used different colors of fabric for all the different pieces, so it will be easier for you to follow along. The main body in faux leather is the pink. This is the wide top zipper panel. You should have 1 in faux leather and 1 in lining fabric. This is the narrow top zipper panel. You should have one in faux leather and one in lining fabric. This is the bottom panel. You should have one in faux leather and one in lining fabric. This is the top handle. You should have one in faux leather. This is the adjustable strap. You should have one long piece or two shorter pieces. In this video, I'm going to make my strap short so that you can see the whole strap on camera. This is the mesh pocket. You should have one in mesh. Zipper strap. You should have one in lining fabric. This is the zipper pocket. You should have one in lining fabric. This is the binding. You should have two in lining fabric. Let's start sewing. To make one continuous strap, lay one of the strap pieces right side facing up, then take the other strap piece and place on top, right side facing down, perpendicular to the first piece so that the corners line up like you see on screen. Now draw a diagonal line from one corner to the other corner. Then sew on the drawn line. Leave half an inch or 1.5 centimeters seam allowance and cut off the excess faux leather. Finger press the seam allowance open and top stitch each side using a 1/4 inch or 7 millimeter seam allowance. Now that both pieces are together, draw a horizontal line through the center of the strap. Place a strip of double-sided tape 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter from each side of the drawn horizontal line. Partially remove the backing of the tape and fold the short edges 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter to the wrong side and clip in place. Remove the rest of the paper backing from the tape and fold each long edge towards the drawn line. Fold in half again and pin in place. Then stitch around the strap using a 1/8 inch or 3 millimeter seam allowance. Now you are ready to attach hardware to the adjustable strap. I made my strap shorter than the pattern states, so you would be able to see all of it in the video. Thread the slider through the strap and over the center bar. Then take the short edge and fold it back and pin in place. Now you can sew a square with an X in it, or if you want, you can sew a square and install a rivet. This is how it looks at this point. Lay your strap so the short sewn end is on the back. Then slide on a swivel clasp and turn it to the other side, so you have the short sewn end facing up. Slide the empty end of the strap through the slider and through the other side. Now you have created a loop where you have the short end inside between the layers. Now take the last swivel clasp and put the strap through, then fold the short edge to the back and pin in place. This is how it looks from the front and from the back. Now you will do like you did before and either sew a square with an X in it or a square and install a rivet. This is how the finished strap will look, with yours being longer, of course. Now you can easily adjust your strap to make it shorter or longer as needed. To do the quilting effect, take one of your main body pieces in faux leather and use a pencil to make a small mark at the top and bottom at a 45-degree angle. Now use a different colored pencil to make two other marks at the top and bottom, again at a 45-degree angle, going in the opposite way. Place your cardstock at the small pencil markings and sew along the edge to ensure a straight line without sewing into your cardstock. Then move the cardstock to the line just sewn and sew another row of stitching. Continue to do this until all the lines are created. Then place the cardstock at the color pencil markings and sew like before using the cardstock as a guide. Repeat the quilting of the other main body piece and then remove the painter's tape. Now you can add bling to the front if you want, like I've done here. Now take the mesh pocket and the fold over elastic. Lay the mesh pocket on top of the foldable elastic and up to the center crease. Please note that the elastic should extend beyond the mesh pocket on both sides. Now fold the elastic down and pin in place. Sew the open edge using a 1/8 inch or 3 mm seam allowance. Take one of the main body pieces in lining fabric. Now lay the mesh pocket on top and line up the bottom and side edges and pin in place. Base stitch in place either by hand or machine using a 1/8 inch or 3 mm seam allowance. I like to do this by hand, so I will quickly do that. Cut off the excess elastic. Now take the last main body piece in lining fabric and the zipper tape. Draw onto the back of the zipper tape as indicated in step 1 on page 12 in the pattern. Mark onto the right of the main body in lining fabric as indicated on step 2 on page 12 in the pattern. Place the zipper strap centered and up to the marked line, right sides together, and pin in place. Sew the zipper strap in place by sewing around the rectangle drawn earlier. Cut at the center line and the two small triangles, being careful not to cut into your stitches. Pull the zipper strap through to the other side, then press. Now place the zipper with zipper teeth facing up onto the short right side of the zipper pocket. Base stitch the zipper in place, either by hand or machine, near the bottom edge. Now lay the main body piece on top of the zipper with the right side facing up, being sure to line up the short edges. Then pin in place. Sew only the bottom edge of the window using a 1/8 inch or 3 mm seam allowance. Remove all your pins and basting stitches made earlier. Then move the zipper pull to the short left side of the window. Make a few stitches at each side of the zipper to make new zipper stops. Turn the entire piece so the wrong side is facing up. Then pull the pocket down so the right side of the pocket is facing up. Now fold the bottom edge up to the top edge of the zipper strap. Hold it in place while turning it to the other side. Pin or hand base stitch the top edges through all layers. Now sew the remaining 3 sides of the rectangle through all layers using a 1/8 inch or 3 mm seam allowance. Remove any basting stitches made, then fold the top edge down. Sew the edge close to the other stitching made earlier. Erase the markings made earlier. Pull the lining fabric to the side and sew down the edge of the zipper pocket. You should catch the small triangle. Repeat this for the other side and trim the excess zipper and pocket. Now you have a nice zipper pocket without exposed zipper tape edges. Take your top handle piece in faux leather and draw a line going lengthwise through the handle. Place and center a long strip of double-sided tape onto your drawn line. Remove paper backing from the tape and fold each of the long edges towards the drawn line. Slide 2 D-rings or triangle rings onto the handle. Pin and sew the 2 short edges right sides together using a 1/4 inch or 7 mm seam allowance, making sure your handle is not twisted. Finger press the seam allowance open. Then center a small piece of double-sided tape onto the remaining center line and refold the handle. You can use a hammer onto the wrong side of the short sewn edge to reduce bulk. Move one of the D-rings so it is 5/8 of an inch or 1.5 centimeters away from the short sewn edge. Move the other D-ring to the opposite end. Place a piece of double-sided tape onto the raw, long edge. Turn the handle/loop to the other side so the raw edges meet inside the handle. Make sure you have 5/8 of an inch or 1.5 centimeters from the short sewn edge to the D-ring. Finger press in place so the long folded edges meet. Sew around the handle with the short seam side facing up. To make sewing in faux leather easier, I like to add a little cream to the faux leather. You will need to make a test first on a small piece of your fabric to see if it is discoloring in any way. More tips for sewing with faux leather is on page 2 in the pattern and also in our Facebook group. Start sewing with the needle down at the short seam, then continuing sewing along the long edge using 1/8 of an inch or 3 mm seam allowance. Then coming to the 5/8 of an inch or 1.5 centimeters from the D-ring, turn and sew the short seam and then along the last long edge using a 1/8 inch or 3 mm seam allowance. Punch a hole that is 3/4 of an inch or 2 centimeters in from where the D-ring's fold is. Then punch another hole that is 1 3/8 of an inch or 3.5 centimeters in from the same D-ring. Repeat for the other end of the handle and D-ring. You will use these holes later when you attach the handle. Now take the narrow top zipper panel in lining fabric. Place the zipper on top with zipper teeth facing up. Line up the long edge of the narrow zipper panel with the long edge of the zipper tape. The zipper should extend beyond the fabric on both sides. Now lay the narrow top zipper panel in faux leather on top with the right side facing down. Line up the top edges and also the short edges of the narrow zipper panels and pin in place. Sew along the long edge using a 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter seam allowance. Fold so the wrong sides are together and finger press the edge. Pin the long edges wrong sides together. Top stitch the zipper edge using a 1/8 inch or 3 millimeter seam allowance. Base stitch the long raw edges together. Now take the wide top zipper panels and lay the lining panel right side facing up. Then place the zipper pieces just made on top with the zipper teeth facing up. Line up the long edges and pin in place. Now place the wide panel in faux leather on top, right side facing down. This is the long edge where you have 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters without interfacing. Pin the long edges together. Sew together at the long edge using a 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter seam allowance. Flip the zipper panels so they are wrong sides together and finger press the edge. Pin the long raw edges together. Top stitch the long zipper edge using 1/8 of an inch or 3 millimeter seam allowance. Remove all your pins and flip so that the wrong sides are facing up. Place double-sided tape onto the boning and remove the backing. Then place the boning centered onto the lining fabric seam allowance and all the way up to the sewn edge. Finger press the boning in place, then flip the fabric so the wrong sides are together. Top stitch from the right side of the faux leather using a 1/2 inch or 1.3 centimeter seam allowance measured from the top stitching you just made. This will leave you with a 1/2 inch or 1.3 centimeters between the 2 rows of stitching. Be careful not to sew through the boning because your needle will break. Make a centered mark onto the right side of the wide faux leather. Now measure and mark 4 inches or 10 centimeters to each side of the center mark. Erase the center marking. Now place the straight edge of your handle, where the faux leather folds around the D-ring, up to the marks just made, so that the long edge of the handle follows the stitching. Mark the holes for the handle, and then repeat for the other side using the last marking you made. Cut 2 small Peltex pieces and mark holes from each handle to each Peltex piece. Punch holes in the Peltex pieces and also punch holes at your handle markings through all layers of the wide panel piece. You can add a drop of glue to the punched holes before placing a rivet through the first hole of the handle, then lift the wide faux leather panel and place the rivet through the first hole. Now add the Peltex piece and then place the rivet through the last wide panel piece in lining fabric. The small Peltex piece is now sandwiched between the two wide panels. Then add the cap to the rivet. Repeat this process with each hole until all of your rivets are in place. Slide the zipper pulls towards the middle and base stitch the last 3 edges of the zipper panels using a 1/8 inch or 3 mm seam allowance. Then cut off the excess zipper at each end. Now take the main body piece in faux leather and one in lining fabric with the zipper pocket and place them wrong sides together. Pin around the edges and base stitch using a 1/8 inch or 3 mm seam allowance. Transfer your quarter markings from the pattern piece. Then repeat this process for the last main body pieces. Take the bottom panels and lay the lining fabric right side facing up. Then place the zipper panel on top with the handle facing up and line up the short edges and pin in place. Now place the bottom panel in faux leather on top with the right side facing down and pin. Sew the short edges together using a 1/4 inch or 7 mm seam allowance. Now you will repeat this for the other side. When you do this, the pieces will bend. Turn it so wrong sides are together and the faux leather is facing outside, with the lining fabric on the inside. Top stitch each of the short edges using a 1/4 inch or 7 mm seam allowance. Pin and base stitch the bottom panels wrong sides together using a 1/8 inch or 3 mm seam allowance. Fold and match up the short side seams and pin in place. Mark both sides of the middle of the bottom panel and also mark the middle of the zipper panel. Now fold the zipper panel so that both markings meet and pin in place. Mark the new middles on both sides. These 4 markings will be the quarter markings. Turn it so the lining fabric is facing out. Now you are going to line up the quarter markings, starting with the side that has the narrow top panel. Take the outer front main body piece and line up the bottom quarter markings of the main body piece to the quarter marking of the bottom panel, right sides together, and pin in place. Continue to line up the quarter markings. It is a tight fit to avoid wrinkles, so you can make some small 1/8 inch or 3 mm cuts at the corners of the zipper and bottom panel to help it fit. After pinning around the edge, I like to hand base stitch it and then pin again just to make sure everything stays in place. Sew the pinned edges together using a scant of 1/4 inch or 7 mm seam allowance. If you open the zipper, it will be easier to sew. I like to sew it with the main body piece facing down against the sewing machine. Remove your basting stitches, then turn to see if you caught all the layers. Then turn it back again. I like to attach binding to the edge you just sewed because I think it is easier to do now. Cut a small piece of your binding so that you can cover the ends. Fold the long edges in and finger press. Line up one of the short raw edges of the small piece to the bottom. Sew the small piece in place using 1/8 of an inch or 3 mm seam allowance. Cut the start of the binding so you have a straight edge. Then place the cut edge of the binding onto the middle of the small piece. Line up the raw edge of the folded binding with the raw edge of the main body piece. Pin in place. Continue to pin around the edge. Cut the binding when you are back to where the other end of the binding meet. Sew the binding in place, this time using a 1/4 inch or 7 mm seam allowance. Fold the binding to the other side and pin in place. Also fold the small piece down and tuck the end under the binding. Sew the binding in place using a scant a little under a 1/4 of an inch or 7 mm seam allowance, using a matching thread. Check to see if you caught the binding all the way around, or if you need to go over some areas again. Now you will repeat to attach the last main body piece to the other side. Make sure to open the zipper. Take the last main body piece and line up the 1/4 markings and pin in place. Again, I like to hand base stitch it in place and pin it again, just to be sure everything stays where it's supposed to. Sew together using a scant a little under a 1/4 of an inch or 7 mm seam allowance. Remember to open the zipper. It is very important to be able to turn it out again. Remove the base stitching and turn it to see if you caught all the layers. Then turn it back again. Cut another small piece from the binding and fold it like you did before. Line up and sew in place like before. Now you will attach and sew the binding like you did before. Fold the binding to the other side and pin in place. Turn right side out. Finger press the curved edges. If you want to have a more short edge, you can use a hammer and a piece of flex foam, or you can go around the curved edges using pliers and flex foam to prevent marks. To make a sturdy bottom, to prevent the bottom of the bag from sagging, measure the width and height of the bottom. Cut a piece of corrugated plastic or other sturdy material in these measurements. Now add 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters to the width and length and cut 2 pieces in lining fabric. Pin right sides together and sew 3 of the edges using a 1/4 inch or 7 millimeter seam allowance, leaving 1 short edge open. Cut the top 2 corners. Turn right side out and carefully poke out your corners, then press. Slide the corrugated plastic inside the sleeve. Tuck the opening seam allowance inside and pin in place. Hand stitch the opening closed. Put the bottom just made inside the bag. Now you can attach the adjustable strap made earlier. Congrats! You are done! I hope you enjoyed the video and sewing along with me. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that bell button to get notifications when new videos are added. You can get this pattern and more at sewnideas.com. Until next time.